This senseless act of violence took place over 25 years ago. The silence of the evening streets in Greene County, Tennessee, USA, was shattered by the sound of gunfire. Law enforcement quickly recognized the scene. The officers found a murdered family at the site, shot and stacked on top of each other. Now, they had to solve one of the most shocking cases in American criminal history. The father of the family, Lillelid, came from Bergen, Norway. Despite his young age of only 20, he decided to embark on a fateful journey and ended up in Florida, USA. Here, the young man wanted to fulfill his dreams. He was the youngest of 4 children in his family and had been a modest, kind, and positive young man from a young age. He dreamed of having a wife and children, and a good future for them. Lillelid met Delphina, who was born in New Jersey in March 1969. The couple decided to move to Miami and got married in February of the following year. In 1991, the newlyweds had their first child, a girl they named Tabitha. Soon, the couple realized they wanted a quieter life. Away from the hustle and bustle of Miami, they began searching for a more peaceful place to grow their family and ended up on the outskirts of Knoxville, Tennessee, in a suburb called Powell. It was a typical American suburb, quiet and peaceful with idyllic views of nature and a tight-knit community. The young couple was warmly welcomed by the residents of the town. It seemed as though their search for a better place to live had ended, and they could enjoy life in peace. In 1995, the couple had a son named Peter. The Lillelids decided to buy a larger house so that each family member could have their own room. They moved into a 50-year-old house in 1996, one of the most remarkable creations of architectural genius, located in the suburb. Once the family moved in, they immediately began making ambitious plans for the future. To live a full life, extensive repairs on the old house and various household structures were necessary. The couple enthusiastically set to work, with the top priority being the renovation of the guest house where Delphina's mother was supposed to live. The young family was not wealthy and had bought the house because of its low price. They were aware of the amount of work needed but were determined to overcome all difficulties together. Their friends and relatives remembered the Lillelids as people dedicated to their faith and family. They worked tirelessly. Delphina worked in a local restaurant and dedicated her free time to raising Tabitha and Peter, envisioning a bright and wonderful future for her children. The Lillelids were very religious. In April 1997, the local community held a large congress in a neighboring state, a gathering for everyone wanting to deepen their faith and learn how best to do so. April 6, 1997, was the last day of these meetings. The community invited the family for dinner, but the Lillelids were eager to get home and lacked the necessary funds. They had spent most of their savings on the trip and new clothes for all family members to fit into the Congress atmosphere. The young couple and their children were grateful for the invitation but decided to celebrate in a smaller circle. On their way back, they planned a picnic to celebrate the occasion and create a party atmosphere for the children. As they traveled, Peter complained of a severe headache. It was already 7:30 p.m. and it was starting to get dark. Lillelid pulled off the highway near Greene County, Tennessee, parked at a rest area, and decided to take a walk with the boy to clear his head. Meanwhile, Delphina and Tabitha went to the restroom, where they encountered a few strange girls. At the restroom exit, Peter and his father were already standing across from the spot where the family had stopped. They had finished their walk, and Peter felt better as they waited for the return of his mother and Tabitha to organize a snack. At that moment, they were noticed by several people. In Knoxville, there was a small motel called the Colonial Motel, where a bunch of young people from Kentucky had checked into one of the rooms. There were 6 of them: 18-year-old Natasha Cornett, 17-year-old Karen Howell, 20-year-old Joseph Risner, 14-year-old Jason Bryant, 19-year-old Edward Dean Marlin, and 18-year-old Crystal Sturgill. Most of them had trouble with the law, abusive parents, dysfunctional families, and domestic violence. These young men and women found it hard in school and banded together to survive, loitering around and leading an unhealthy lifestyle. They consumed alcohol and illegal substances. The young people lived in different towns, roamed the country, stayed in motels, and usually rented a room for an extended period. This time, they checked into the Colonial Motel on April 4th, just a few days before they struck with their truly inhuman brutality in Tennessee. The young men drew attention from the motel management in the first few days due to their strange and defiant behavior. They painted pentagrams and tridents on the walls and brought necessary utensils. Feeling free from the control of the older generation, the youths ignored moral and social norms. Initially, it all had the character of occultism and self-mutilation. At night, candles flickered in front of the windows. Some of these young men and women used razor blades to cut each other's hands. This action was not only a protest against the suffering but also a cry for help that went unheard. Society was indifferent to them. Most had endured years of cruelty and tyranny, leading them to a series of brutal events. The young people often behaved inappropriately, causing significant damage to the hotel room, breaking many pieces of furniture, and painting the walls. The ordinary room quickly became a hideout for drug addicts, regularly engaging in what could be called ritual acts. It reflected their inner chaos and anger. When Delphina and her daughter saw the 2 girls in the restroom, they turned out to be guests of the hotel, Natasha and Karen. At first glance, they seemed like normal teenagers but were, in reality, real lunatics with a long history of drug addiction and petty crime. They eagerly participated in occult activities and satanic rituals, ready to cross the line of what was permissible. Psychiatrists who later worked with these young people found that they were simply trying to find their place in life. The young men were victims of years of torture and cruelty, manifesting as hatred for the world. They were on a level where bloodthirstiness and violence had become the norm and a way to assert themselves among their peers. Obviously, they had no good intentions or kindness in their minds. They created an underground community ready to do more than just silently draw pentagrams. They wanted revenge, as brutal as possible. The leader of the group was Natasha Cornett. She declared that she would trigger the Armageddon and claimed that they could not be stopped and were determined to take revenge on the entire world. Natasha had made similar confessions before, but no one had paid much attention to them. It was probably the lack of interest and ignoring her words that led to these extremes. Natasha claimed to have been talking to angels and demons since childhood. From a young age, she called herself the daughter of Satan and was obsessed with witchcraft, which was exacerbated by her abuse of alcohol and illegal substances. By 7th grade, she developed an eating disorder that led to hospitalization in Lexington. Doctors diagnosed her with severe manic-depressive disorder, anxiety, and an obsessive desire to harm herself and others. At the age of 14, she was admitted to a psychiatric clinic for disturbed teenagers. The doctors did everything to help Natasha resolve her socialization and family problems. Unfortunately, this did not bring the expected success. At 17, Natasha found her love and was married for a while to a man named Stephen Cornett. However, when he realized he was dealing with an abnormal person and saw how dangerous she was, he decided to separate from her. This disturbed Natasha's fragile mental balance, and her condition worsened after moving to New Orleans, where she became the victim of a brutal attack involving 5 men. This event caused her severe emotional distress and worsened her mental disorders. Natasha dreamed of experiencing a film-like killing spree, with a young couple traveling across America and killing anyone who got in their way. Once, she even threatened her mother with a knife and ran away from home. At the time of the events in question, she was at the height of her problems, posing a real threat to herself and others. To find a way to realize her film dream, Natasha gathered like-minded people around her after running away from home. Many of them had similar issues. Natasha's best friend was Karen Howell, who was also into witchcraft. She came from a broken family, had a long history of substance and alcohol abuse, and was constantly causing trouble, even at home. During her school years, her parents had serious relationship problems, and she repeatedly witnessed violent confrontations and physical abuse by her father. Like her best friend, she was obsessed with harming herself and others. She attempted suicide 4 times. Karen exhibited erratic behavior and was unable to integrate into school, changing 4 schools due to constant quarrels and complaints from teachers. Eventually, she was homeschooled, but staying in a toxic home made things worse. During this time, she began holding Ouija sessions and trying to communicate with demonic beings. On top of that, she regularly used drugs. She became the second passenger in the car, carrying weapons for the gang. At the wheel of the broken-down car was Karen's boyfriend, Joseph Risner. Joseph was born on October 13, 1976, in Hazard. He did not know his biological father and took his stepfather's last name. In 1986, the family moved to Georgia, but the parents' relationship significantly deteriorated there. Later, they divorced, and his mother, Mary, became actively involved in church activities. By this time, Joseph was already known as a drug addict. He had started using drugs at the age of 10 and quickly moved on to hard substances. Joseph claimed to have had intimate experiences with 2 nannies who took care of him when he was 12 years old. In 1993, his mother remarried, and at 18, Joseph continued to use illegal substances, leading to problematic interactions with peers. Joseph dated Natasha Cornett for a while before they broke up, but their friendship remained. Afterward, he dated her best friend, Karen. In 1995, he joined the army, hoping for a military career, but he failed because of his drug use and was discharged. Joseph decided to leave everything behind and joined a group gathered by Natasha. At this time, Natasha was the group's leader and had met a new boyfriend, Edward Dean Marlin. He had recently joined them. Edward was born on January 26, 1978, and had lived in a decent family for a long time. He seemed like a normal teenager, avoiding trouble with the law and not engaging in criminal activities, working at a local grocery store. Edward was very religious and attended church with his family. But that changed when he met Natasha. The girl clearly dominated him, causing negative and disturbing changes in his behavior. He stopped going to church and turned to the dark side. His parents noticed what was happening and tried to intervene in the relationship to bring their son back to his normal life. But Natasha's influence was stronger than his mother's words. He ran away from home and moved into a motel. Their love went so far that the couple planned a wedding. The youngest in the group was 14-year-old Jason, born on July 18 in the small mining town of Hellier. Despite his young age, he had long been on the police radar and was on probation at the time of the events in question. The main problems began after he encountered drugs and alcohol. In fact, the young man's troubles started much earlier than meeting Natasha. At school, he was found to have developmental delays, with an IQ not exceeding 85. This led to negative emotional and social shifts. His parents were indifferent to what was happening, worsening the situation. After meeting Natasha, he decided to join the group. During this time, he was participating in a rehabilitation program. Professionals worked with him, trying to reintegrate him into normality, but in the end, it was not enough. The young man gave up. Natasha and Jason drank each other's blood, calling it an act of great love. They truly believed that such a thing would strengthen their bond. Crystal Sturgill was born on March 13, 1979, in the town of Harold. In elementary school, her grades were above average, but that changed when she started high school and began using drugs. The girl experienced no major shocks in her early years, making her seem the most normal of the group. She had at most a few quarrels over her younger brother, who was bullied at school. She smoked in the locker room, incurring the wrath of teachers. In December 1996, more serious problems began. Crystal reached puberty, started constantly arguing with her parents, and running away from home. There was a police report. The girl said that her stepfather had long abused and repeatedly raped her, stopping only when she had a boyfriend. The stepfather denied these accusations, and those close to him sided against the girl, calling her a liar. As a result of the court proceedings, she was placed in social services, moving through 13 different families before meeting Natasha and joining the group. Natasha Cornett's plans for Armageddon began to come true on April 6. The group broke into the house of a police officer living in a neighboring district. Jason caused a disturbance outside to distract the homeowner while the others sneaked in and stole 9mm and .25 caliber pistols, 2 boxes of ammunition, and $500 in cash. From that point, their plan for the apocalypse took shape. Then they drove back to Knoxville, where they would begin their bloody march. Joseph drove a blue Chevrolet station wagon used by a gang of crazed youths. The car was in such poor condition that it looked like it would not survive the trip and fall apart halfway. Because of this, the driver was in a hurry, exceeding the speed limit by more than 30 miles per hour before being stopped by the police. They received a fine, but that was the least of the legal problems the young people faced. They were eventually released, and all 6 armed individuals passed the traffic stop unscathed. The young men realized they needed a suitable vehicle to carry out their plans, so one of the primary tasks was to find a vehicle to steal. It was necessary to act quickly and decisively before the Chevrolet really broke down. So, a group of disturbed youths with weapons set out to commit terrible crimes. They loitered around, coming up with a plan. Then they met the Lillylid family on their way home, stopping at the restroom. As Karen and Natasha lingered in the restroom, the other car occupants discussed the crime. The young men realized they had left a trail when they received a fine for speeding. At this point, they had stolen weapons, money, and ammunition in the car. They knew they could be caught and that this would be grounds for serious charges. To avoid prosecution, the Satanists wanted to remodel the car. They first thought they could burn it. At this point, the youths saw Peter and his father when the Lillylid family stopped at the parking lot where the teenagers were and immediately caught their attention. As Delphina left the restroom, she was confronted by Natasha and Karen, who were dressed in dark clothing. The woman asked the girls if they believed in God, which the teenagers denied. Delphina then offered them a religious brochure, and her naive and kind husband invited the young people to a picnic. The Satanists noticed that the family had traveled in a Dodge, which seemed perfect for their bloodthirsty plans. A sinister plan formed in the young men's minds. Against this backdrop, the criminals decided to act. Naturally, they agreed and joined the family's meal. Joseph and Jason were the first to arrive at the table, followed almost immediately by Natasha and Karen. Joseph took advantage of the situation and returned to the car where Edward and Crystal were sitting. In a whisper, he told the couple they were ready for action. He took the 9mm pistol and told Edward to take the .25mm pistol. As he approached the family with the pistols, the friendly Joseph changed. He slowly walked back across the parking lot, ensuring no random witnesses were around, then pointed the weapon at Lilylid, apologizing for what was happening and saying nothing would happen to them if they obeyed. At gunpoint, he escorted the car owners to the minivan. Lilylid offered them money and the car in exchange for their freedom, but the Satanists wanted to take all four from the parking lot to a remote location. They forced the whole family into the van, where Natasha, Karen, Joseph, and Jason sat. Joseph's Chevrolet followed them, leaving Edward and Crystal behind. Lilylid drove the minivan with the 9mm pistol in hand to control the man's actions. Inside the van, the atmosphere was tense, and Delphina began singing to 6-year-old Tabitha to calm the little girl. Jason ordered them to be gagged, and Natasha offered the child chocolates. They drove a few miles before turning onto the first side road they could find. They drove a few more miles before stopping at an isolated spot. The Lilylids held hands and prayed to God to save them from this evil. The Satanists began to debate what to do next. From this point, their stories diverged significantly. Natasha feared letting the family go, thinking they might betray them, but she didn't want to hurt the children. Lilylid and Delphina offered money again in exchange for their lives, pleading to be let go and promising not to go to the police. The young gang argued among themselves. Some wanted to kill the entire family. Jason didn't want to let the captives go but promised not to harm the children. He convinced Karen and Natasha to return to the van where Joseph was. Then shots were fired outside. The 34-year-old Lilylid was shot multiple times. The first bullet hit his eye, and then the attacker shot him 5 times in the chest at close range using both stolen pistols. Then the shooter fired 8 times at Delphina, shattering her thigh with 2 bullets and hitting her arm with 1. The young mother was then shot in the stomach as she lay on the ground. According to the medical examiner, the 28-year-old Delphina did not die immediately but fought in pain for about 20 minutes after the attack. However, the youth's cruelty didn't end there. They did not keep their promise and pursued the children. This reconstruction of events is based on Natasha's statements, which align best with the found evidence, but even her account is not considered completely reliable. Natasha claimed from the start that Jason was the shooter, while Jason defended himself, saying he was incapable of such cruelty. He claimed Joseph was the shooter, while Joseph said he sat in the van with his eyes closed to avoid seeing what was happening. The police believed all the criminals were involved in the massacre. But Jason was a special case because he was a minor and could not be legally held accountable as an adult, which carried the death penalty for such a brutal crime. The perpetrators were caught relatively quickly. A construction worker near the massacre site was sleeping in a building and heard the shots. Initially, he thought they were hunters and ignored the sound, but then there was an eerie silence and loud laughter. As the man admitted, the sound sent a chill down his spine. More shots followed. This combination of frightening noises seemed suspicious to the construction worker, who called the police. At the crime scene, investigators found a gruesome sight: 4 bodies stacked in a ditch. When the police discovered the bodies, Delphina was still twitching in pain, but that stopped after a few minutes. The man was dead. Tabitha lay on her father's stomach, breathing despite the terrible gunshot wound. Peter lay face down in the dirt next to his mother. When the officer approached to turn him over, the boy screamed. The officer stayed with him, called the paramedics, and held his hand until the ambulance arrived. The children were airlifted to a regional hospital, where doctors continued to fight for their lives. Unfortunately, 6-year-old Tabitha soon died. Only a few dozen meters away stood an abandoned blue Chevrolet with headlights dimly illuminating the darkness. Tire tracks of another vehicle were also found there, later used to identify the couple's van. A plan for a manhunt was announced, and all nearby roads were closed. All vehicles were searched. The Chevrolet, which the young crazies had left at the massacre site, was crucial. The license plate was quickly found, and it turned out it had been torn off and thrown away a kilometer from the scene. This led the police to contact Joseph's mother, who had reported her son's car stolen 2 days before the incident. She also mentioned Natasha, with whom her son planned to flee to Mexico. The car with the young people was stopped at the Mexican border. They had no documents with them. On April 8, around 5 p.m., they reached the U.S. border, where their vehicle was checked against the database. It was found that the car was reported stolen and the perpetrators were possibly involved in a triple murder. The Satanists were then escorted back by police officers. Natasha Cornett, 18, Karen Howell, 17, Joseph Risner, 20, Jason Bryant, 14, Edward Dean Marlin, 19, and Crystal Sturgill, 18, were arrested. After the young people were arrested, they quickly confessed to the car theft. When it became clear that it was pointless to deny the murders, they told an absurd story that the family had died in an accident, as if they had been run over by a van while turning around. All this supposedly happened by accident, but the police knew the family had been shot. After the arrest, it was found that Jason had gunshot wounds to his arm and leg. There were very contradictory statements about the origin of these injuries. The teenager himself claimed he had been shot by Joseph when he refused to take the blame for the massacre. Others believed the young man did it himself to create a convincing alibi. Even before the trial began, the judge was repeatedly asked by the defense to hold separate hearings for each defendant. The lawyers also requested to move the trial to another district where the incident was not widely known. All these requests were denied. The 4 older participants faced the death penalty, while Karen and Jason faced life imprisonment without parole. Faced with this threat, the local community came together, demanding the death penalty for these bloodthirsty subhumans. Every session saw a crowd outside the courthouse chanting, "Burn in hell." During the interrogations, each Satanist tried to blame the others. Most accused Jason because of his young age. However, all stories were different, making it impossible to determine the exact chronology of events and understand who exactly shot the Lillylid family. There is still debate about this today. The judge concluded that each person played a role leading to the inevitable shooting of the family. Not everyone pulled the trigger, but all were present at the kidnapping and murder and did nothing to stop it. No one helped or saved the family, even though the opportunity was there. Consequently, each of them was guilty. The hearing began in March 1998. By then, all 6 had pleaded guilty on the advice of their lawyers as part of a deal with the prosecution, guaranteeing them life sentences without parole and helping them avoid the death penalty. However, this lenient solution had many opponents among the locals who demanded the execution of the young monsters, who did not deserve leniency. To this day, the 6 perpetrators try to reopen the case in their defense, claiming they were too young to understand what they were doing and could not stand up to the others. They continue to deny their involvement, blaming each other. Natasha, the group's leader, was the first to appeal, but she was denied like the others. In 2017, Karen wrote a letter stating she was innocent, had nothing to do with the family's shooting, and did not deserve a life sentence like the other murderers. She dispelled some rumors that their group was a sect and that they had arranged the bodies in the shape of a cross, calling it all false and claiming they were just a group of disturbed teenagers. Peter, the 2-year-old who miraculously survived, took a long time to recover mentally and physically and now has to wear an eye prosthesis for the rest of his life. The family of Lilylid and Delphina later fought for custody. The boy eventually moved to Sweden to live with his aunt. He never fully recovered from the incident. But as an adult, he returned to the United States, where he started a family and made a career. To this day, it cannot be said with certainty what exactly happened on that deserted road where the family was shot at close range. Even today, locals who have never experienced such brutality remember this tragedy with horror. Thanks for watching, and take care. One of the most important safety rules is to never talk to strangers and do not trust them. This is more than true, but statistically speaking, the greatest danger can come from people you know. Today we tell the story of one of the most brutal murderers in the United States, who literally reduced an entire family to rubble. Amanda Louise Pruitt Doss was born in 1976 in Muskogee, Oklahoma, USA. It is a small town typical for this region. It is quiet and not characterized by any special attractions. The crime rate here is minimal, and the majority of the population consists of married couples with children. However, Amanda Doss did not like this area and so she moved to another place at a young age. She settled in Redwater, Texas. Here, she found herself in a suburb with about 800 inhabitants. During this time, Amanda tried to build a relationship with the man she married. From this marriage, Amanda's first child was born, a girl named Genevieve, born in August 1999. The family called the girl General, and she was a wonderful child with a calm character. Jen grew up a little and became an activist and a Girl Scout when she attended Redwater High School. She was considered caring and responsible, which was evident in everything she did. Jen was completely selfless and once donated all the money and toys she received for Christmas to a children's home. That was when she was 9 years old, and it happened again on her next birthday. 4 years after the birth of her first child, Amanda had a second child. A boy named Texas, born in May 2003. The child was very similar to his sister, also loving to help others, and he became a scout as soon as he attended Redwater High School. The children were very close and friendly to each other. For all the neighbors, Amanda's family was the model of an American couple with children. Unfortunately, the couple divorced a few years before the events described, and the children now lived with their mother. She tried to provide them with an education and everything they needed for life. Working hard. During these moments, the woman was supported by a nanny, 16-year-old Rachel, who got along well with the children. Despite the apparent idyll, a grim fate was looming for these lovely people. May 11, 2011, was an ordinary day for the family. At this point, the 34-year-old woman was divorced and lived with her children in a cozy house in a quiet suburb. It was expected that they would have dinner and watch TV before going to bed that evening. Everything went as usual in complete silence. After spending time together, the children went to their beds. But at 3 a.m., their peace was disturbed. At this time, Amanda's parents received a frightening call from their granddaughter General. They later recalled the call with tears in their eyes. It was hard to understand anything. The child was screaming unintelligibly into the receiver with a lot of noise in the background, then calls, screams, and then the connection was cut off. Amanda and the children could not be reached, so the concerned grandparents got into the car and drove to their daughter's house to find out what was happening. They were very worried. However, they arrived too late, as the fire that had engulfed the house was visible several streets away. They knew their daughter and grandchildren could be in the house, so they left the car in the driveway, jumped out, and immediately ran into the burning building. They managed to find Jen, who was unconscious on the living room floor. They dragged the girl outside, nearly burning themselves in the fire, but General showed no signs of life. The elderly couple could do nothing more, as they were severely traumatized and burned. They called for help. The grandparents were beside themselves with worry about their daughter and grandchildren's fate. When firefighters and rescue workers arrived, medics provided first aid to the elderly couple. They were then taken to the hospital due to the severity of their burns, but General could not be helped anymore. Doctors confirmed her death. Firefighters fought the blaze in the building for several hours. It was only at dawn that they managed to extinguish the flames that had destroyed much of the house. To make matters worse, evidence also burned in the fire. It was necessary to determine what caused the fire and what had happened in the house that night. Once the last embers were extinguished, firefighters examined the scene of the fire. Initially, it was assumed that the fire was caused by a faulty electrical system. However, later the bodies of the remaining family members were discovered, and the condition of the bodies suggested something much worse. The 34-year-old Amanda, 11-year-old General, and 8-year-old Texas had been brutally stabbed. They had been killed before the fire, as confirmed by the medical examiner, who found no soot in their airways. Reinforcements were called to the scene, and investigators began to investigate the murder case. They also examined the charred house and the victims' bodies. According to all findings, the fire's starting point was Amanda's body, and the intruder had likely used some flammable substance to ignite the flames. Probably, he had also sprayed the furniture, walls, and floor, explaining why it took so long to extinguish the fire. Forensic scientists combed every inch of the ashes for clues. It was immediately clear that electrical appliances had nothing to do with it and that the fire had been deliberately set, likely to hide evidence at the scene of the triple murder. Law enforcement immediately turned to the public through the media. They offered a reward of $4,000 for information leading to the capture of the perpetrator who had brutally murdered a mother and 2 children. The public was shocked by the news of the murder of a small family. It was clear that Amanda had no enemies who would wish her dead. She was a nice, friendly woman. Investigators questioned neighbors and relatives of the victims to find out if there could be a motive for the atrocity. However, no information could be obtained. About 4 weeks passed, during which the police station received dozens of calls from random witnesses hoping to receive a high reward. The individuals provided various information, but no useful data could be obtained to advance the investigation. In the 4th week of the investigation, as the police had already combed the burnt house inch by inch dozens of times, a woman from California called the station and made a startling statement. For security reasons, it was later decided not to name her in the investigation. According to the caller, her acquaintance, the 17-year-old Rachel Pittman, was behind the murder of the family. Initially, it was unclear what made the caller so confident and suspicious. But she provided important information only the investigators knew at that time. Therefore, her statement was credible. The police took her words seriously, followed this lead, and began to verify all the information. The only strange thing about the whole matter was that a person from California, who lived quite far away from the crime in Texas, knew about it. How could she know? Of course, the mysterious stranger was thoroughly checked against the database, but she was not found. It was planned to get in closer contact with her, but the procedure was lengthy due to the great distance. Weeks passed during which all witness requests at the police station were processed. During this time, the investigators managed to contact Rachel and speak to the nanny, who was so confidently accused of the triple murder. The investigators spoke to the girl but could not find anything suspicious. She denied her involvement in the crime and was shocked by what had happened. After all, she knew the family well and had no idea who could have killed the woman and the children. According to her, she had been friends with Amanda and her children for many years, took care of Jen in Texas, and was very close to the family. Rachel had never heard of Amanda having conflicts with others that could have led to such a tragedy. Amanda was quiet and friendly, and her children were real role models. Eventually, the investigators believed that Rachel, due to her young age and cuteness, did not look at all like a suspect in the triple murder. She was genuinely concerned about the tragedy and cooperated with the investigation. Her involvement was considered unlikely, and the search for suspects among other friends and acquaintances of the victims continued. This work took about 3 months but did not bring any progress. At this point, the reward for information leading to the perpetrator's capture was increased by a foundation by another $100,000, but that was not even the turning point. Probably, the perpetrator was simply tormented by his conscience, prompting him to make a shocking confession. About 3 months after the brutal massacre of a single mother and her 2 children, a woman contacted the police station. She was inconsolable and could barely hold back her tears. According to her, her daughter had confessed to the triple murder just a few minutes earlier. The same 17-year-old nanny, Rachel, regularly visited her mother, and during one of the recent visits, it was not a casual chat on the sofa. The girl was tormented by the burden of responsibility and could no longer bear the cruel truth about the night when the house caught fire. This truth was worse than all the investigators' assumptions. Rachel confessed to her mother that she was the one who attacked the family that night and then set the house on fire to destroy the evidence. Rachel's mother was shocked. She had not expected such atrocities from her daughter. Although the motherly instinct always drives one to protect their own child, it did not work in this situation. The details of the crime that the 17-year-old girl confessed to were too gruesome, so her mother decided to report her to the police. This confession secured Rachel's mother a reward of $140,000, but she refused it. She did not act out of selfish motives but simply wanted to do the right thing and punish the perpetrator. Even though it was her daughter. The investigators, who had heard Rachel's name before and had been in contact with her, immediately set out to arrest the perpetrator. As it turned out, this gruesome story was much stranger than it first appeared. During her arrest, the suspect told everything that happened that fateful night in detail. According to the nanny, a friend called her that evening, and they had an inconspicuous conversation. Still, in the end, this woman said she had to kill Amanda. Without going into detail, she spoke as if the matter was urgent and important and ordered the nanny to do it. It seemed that this crime had been planned for a long time, and Rachel was to be the executor of the murder. The nanny had to agree. However, the criminal wanted to wait until the single mother's children were not at home to avoid killing them, but her friend was relentless and demanded that she act immediately. So, Rachel decided to act now, even though the children were at home. The night fire was also no coincidence. The girl knew that killing people would inevitably leave traces that would allow the police to find her. So, she set the fire to destroy all the evidence. It was all planned in advance. On the way to her friend's house, Rachel bought a bottle of lemonade. The girl emptied it and filled it with gasoline at the nearest gas station. After murdering the children and their mother, she poured the flammable liquid over all the bodies and set them on fire. The confession alone, however, was not enough to ensure that the perpetrator would be punished in court. Without direct evidence, the case seemed to be at a dead end. But the nanny made a mistake. During the triple murder, she cut herself with her knife. Naturally, the nanny set the house on fire, destroying all the evidence inside. But as Rachel fled, she jumped over the fence, leaving a bloody stain from her hand, which she tried to wipe off but failed. This material was later collected and analyzed in the lab, proving with 100% certainty that the blood on the fence came from Rachel. The young criminal had a good chance of escaping justice. She managed to kill 3 people without being caught on cameras and had entirely escaped the eyes of witnesses. When Rachel returned home after the murder, she took off all her clothes and burned them along with her shoes. She hid the knife she had broken in the forest, and the wooden handle of the knife was burned along with her clothes. During a search of the forest area where the weapon was supposed to be, investigators could not find it. However, they could almost completely collect the leather sheath of the knife handle, on which Rachel's DNA was found. Despite all this valuable information on which the prosecution's tactics were based, the prosecutor believed that more was behind the crime. The scale of the preparation and the knowledge of eliminating traces indicated a carefully planned murder. It was by no means the impulsive act of a teenager who was persuaded and lured into a crime. Some believed that at least one other accomplice was involved in the crime, who remained unknown throughout the entire process. According to these people, it was the mysterious stranger who first gave Rachel a clue. Investigators met with this mysterious stranger and questioned him. According to the sparse information released to the public, the informant had no motive to be hostile to her friend Amanda. They had been close friends for many years, and the woman was shocked by Rachel's accusations that she had given the order to execute the mother and the children. The woman denied this and successfully passed a lie detector test. Investigators did not consider her a suspect and did not charge her because they also did not believe she was involved in the murder, and this was later confirmed. The logical next step was a psychiatric assessment of Rachel, who behaved very strangely. It was necessary to determine the degree of the murderer's sanity, as her condition could completely discredit the confession. The most suspicious thing about the whole matter was Rachel's confession that she had not decided to commit the crime herself but had been persuaded by an older friend. The police could not confirm the fact of such a conversation. Investigators managed to get hold of a recording of this conversation, but there was no hint of incitement to the crime. The two had a conversation shortly before the murder, but only about ordinary everyday topics. However, there were very serious concerns about her mental health. Several psychiatric experts had worked with the girl, and all were convinced that she suffered from severe mental disorders. The girl indeed believed she had had a dialogue with her older friend, who ordered her to kill Amanda and the children. All this likely pointed to a severe form of deviation, the paranoid schizophrenic spectrum. In some cases, patients with such problems begin to hear voices. They can have obsessions and hallucinations and not recognize what is happening. All this makes such people extremely dangerous, as Rachel clearly demonstrated. But what fate awaited a criminal who suffered from such severe illnesses? She had a good chance of receiving compulsory treatment and avoiding a prison sentence, which was undesirable for the prosecution. The experts carefully analyzed the scanned material at their disposal. It was evident that the perpetrator had acted deliberately. She had meticulously planned the act, eliminated all traces, and could have escaped justice if her conscience had not struck. Rachel was aware that she had committed an atrocity, as she felt the need to cover her tracks to avoid responsibility. The girl knew she faced a severe punishment for the triple murder. The defense also involved a psychiatric expert who sided with Rachel. According to the doctor, the girl's distorted perception could have played a cruel joke under the given circumstances. She might have believed she was doing the right thing and tended to believe that Rachel was insane at that time. This was supported by the formulations the voices used during her conversations with her friend. They demanded that Amanda be freed from her misery. Patients with paranoid schizophrenic disorders often cannot distinguish between right and wrong, but their actions can appear very deliberate. This explained the girl's behavior and the thoroughness with which she eliminated all evidence of the atrocities. The defense also acknowledged the involvement of another person in the crime, but the doctor argued that Rachel's mind had devised the insidious plan and the murder plan itself. The psychiatrist for the prosecution spent hours examining the patient's condition, concluding that the 17-year-old had long had hallucinations. She claimed that shop window signs and even random people on the street whispered to her to free Amanda from her misery. Gradually, it became a kind of obsession that constantly occupied her mind. Rachel began to see it as a command from above, as if the universe itself urged her to commit a crime. But the call from a friend in California was the drop that broke the camel's back. These mental problems persisted for weeks. For a while, the girl heard the voices of snakes. Later, she began to hear demonic sounds and see ghosts. In one of these hallucinations, Rachel saw a pink cloud that, in her opinion, contained the souls of 3 future victims. The madness developed rapidly. The babysitter actually created a cult of personality in which she communicated with the demons in her own head. The accused was tried as an adult because of the severity of the crime, but she was not threatened with the death penalty, which is in force in the state of Texas. In 2013, during the trial, Rachel agreed to a deal with the prosecution to have her sentence commuted. According to her, she went to her longtime friend Amanda's house at 3 a.m. and woke her up. The woman went downstairs to see who was disturbing her family so late. It turned out to be 17-year-old Rachel, who had looked after Amanda's children more than once. She was a longtime family friend and was welcomed with open arms by the single mother. For the children, Rachel was like an older sister. This person was the last one from whom they expected evil. However, this time Rachel did not come to them with good intentions. Despite the late hour, the single mother invited her acquaintance into the house. At the doorstep, Rachel offered her friend Amanda a drink. The babysitter was a little tipsy and wanted to talk to her about everyday problems. And she agreed. The girl had not been quite normal for a while. Her behavior had been strange for some time. Sometimes it seemed as if she could not distinguish between reality and fiction. Initially, they just sat and talked, drinking a little but in moderation, each having a glass of wine. Then the babysitter started a serious conversation with Amanda and wanted to share information she considered important. She believed that the nameless friend was planning something bad against Amanda and the children. And they discussed the problem but eventually concluded that everything was just made up. After a while, the uninvited guest was ready to leave. They went to the living room, The babysitter said goodbye to Amanda, stood up, and walked to the door. But just one step from the exit, she turned around, drew a knife from her belt, and lunged at the woman. There was a screaming fight. Rachel stabbed her several times, ending Amanda's life on the spot. The screams and sounds of the fight woke the children. They came to the living room to see what was happening. The girl was the first to recognize the danger, grabbed her phone, and ran to the back room to escape her attacker and call for help. She managed to dial a number but unfortunately did not call the police or emergency services, instead reaching her grandparents. The babysitter then caught up with her and stabbed her. The same fate awaited her brother. Rachel was unsure if she would have left the children alive if they had not come into the living room and witnessed the attack on their mother. Maybe she would have left the house without touching them, but maybe not, as she planned to destroy the evidence by setting the fire. As part of the deal, Rachel Pittman pleaded guilty to all charges and refused to appeal the verdict. She was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. The defense argued that this was a result of mental illness, but despite their protest, the 17-year-old was sent to a juvenile detention center. However, her condition quickly deteriorated there. According to the guards, Rachel quickly organized a sect within the prison walls, gathering her teenage followers who saw her as their Messiah. She spoke of all the forgiveness that God would inevitably grant, but to achieve this, Rachel preached a cruel and perverse way. Unfortunately, all this was quickly absorbed by the juvenile offenders. The former babysitter gathered several other teenagers around her. One of the sect's characteristics was the need to disrespect the prison guards. This caused many problems and conflicts among themselves and with the guards, which only worsened the situation of the young representatives of the criminal world. For the entire prison staff, it was immediately clear that Rachel was very dangerous. She was completely unpredictable. Most of the time, she seemed normal and did not show her abnormalities when talking calmly about neutral topics. However, as soon as someone touched her in any way, for example, to tell her that she was doing something wrong, she immediately turned cold towards that person, and then it turned into open hatred. The girl could not tolerate criticism, losing control instantly, which repeatedly caused conflicts. From the moment of her imprisonment, her behavior was considered terrible. She was held in a juvenile detention center until 2012. During this time, she had several serious altercations with inmates, one of whom knocked out her teeth. She also made several attempts to escape from her cell. Additionally, she used a piece of paper to jam the cell door lock, allowing her to come and go freely. She was also found guilty of conspiring against one of the other inmates, whom she wanted to attack. On the day Rachel decided to sentence another man to death, she managed to escape from her cell again. She also found a blade from a pencil sharpener, which she used to make an improvised knife. The night before the fight, she cut her hair with the blade so it could not be grabbed and used against her. By the end of her stay in the juvenile detention center, the entire facility staff was convinced that the girl needed medical help. The situation worsened day by day, and Rachel was a frightening mix of dangerous traits. She was very aggressive, showed no fear, and seemed very intelligent and cunning. According to the guards, only a psychiatric institution could help calm this monster. After these incidents, the young woman was transferred to a women's prison in Texas. So far, there are no signs of improvement, and the criminal with clear signs of mental illness continues to plot in prison. She faces a life sentence but could be released on parole in August 2041. One can hardly imagine what people in the surrounding towns will expect when the brutal murderer, who is particularly bitter, is released. That will happen when she is 47 years old. So far, there are still many white spots in this case, so the motive for such a brutal murder remains unclear. After all, Rachel was a trusted friend of the family. What could have motivated her to such aggression? Many people still believe that Rachel could not have committed such a sophisticated and brutal murder alone. This means that another accomplice remains at large. Is it possible that she deliberately covered up the crime against the background of a worsening mental illness so thoroughly? The convicted person's lawyer believes that the police only wanted to quickly close the case without really investigating and therefore took every opportunity to put Rachel in prison. The prosecution counters that they presented a whole series of solid evidence that leaves no doubt about the guilt of the 17-year-old girl. Moreover, the defendant, after communicating with the mysterious older friend, did not name any other names that could be considered. The case was so sensational that locals still remember the murder in the house with horror and await the release of the dangerous criminal with fear. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourself. Jasmine Kaur was born on September 14, 1999, in India and was the first child of a woman named Rajpul Kaur. It should be clarified that the word Kaur means princess. Kaur is often used as a middle name, but for the heroines of today's story, it was a surname. It is known that Rajpul gave birth to twin sons Gurman and Sukmo after Jasmine. The children's father died when the girl was only 6 years old, and the family took this loss hard. In 2017, 18-year-old Jasmine decided to go to Australia in search of new opportunities. She knew her relatives lived there. Uncle Sam Bordua, who lived in Adelaide with his wife Ramandi and their daughter, welcomed his niece, and Jasmine settled with them. The girl, drawn to medicine and the desire to help people, set out to study in South Australia. After passing the exams, she enrolled as a nurse. To somehow help the family that hosted her, Jasmine volunteered to cook for them, and it should be noted that she mastered this task perfectly. But that wasn't all. Her aunt and cousin admired her ability to dress tastefully, which she politely taught her relatives. Additionally, Jasmine proved to be a talented fashion connoisseur and readily shared her knowledge. Despite her young age, she established herself as a reliable, responsible, and conscientious young woman. The excellent upbringing and education her parents gave her complemented Jasmine's kindness, making her a role model for those around her. The girl was very attached to her mother and missed her a lot, calling her and other close relatives every day to tell them how she lived and what she did. Before starting her medical studies, Jasmine decided to gain practical experience by working in a nursing home in a suburb of Adelaide. It is believed that her fate crossed with Tariq Singh there. Tariq Jat was born in 1999 in a village in the Indian state of Punjab and was the firstborn of his parents. After some time, the second child, Singhan, was born. The children's father worked as a farmer on a small plot of land where the family lived. The mother managed the household and took care of the children. Tariq Jat's childhood was bleak and hopeless. The house always had a bad atmosphere because Singh Makan was excessively cruel, preferring to resolve conflicts with violence, and his sons grew up in fear of their own father. Mama was a kind of refuge for them. She knew how to calm and comfort them. Additionally, the brothers loved their maternal grandparents very much, where they always felt safe. Tariq J's mother noticed the boy's immense kindness and sincerity. His mere presence lifted everyone's spirits. At school, he also proved to be an exemplary student, striving for new knowledge. When it was time for him to decide on further education, As is customary in India, he proved to everyone with top grades that he was on the right path and had a promising career ahead of him. In 2016, when Tariq Jat graduated from school, his grandparents managed to gather a small amount for their grandson and helped him move to Australia. The guy had long been drawn to Australia, and he finally got the wonderful opportunity to live in charming Adelaide. Like many young people at the time, he successfully passed the standard English test, a prerequisite for admission to the University of South Australia, and was accepted as a student. Tariq Jat had many directions and research fields open to him. After some consideration, he decided on information technology and aimed for a bachelor's degree. At the same time, he had to work to support himself. For Tariq J, this was no problem. He tried various places, most of which were related to elderly care. Colleagues loved and respected him, and employers appreciated his honesty and kindness, certainly leaving positive reviews and recommendations for Tariq J. He continued to work hard, and it soon became clear that compassion and helping the disadvantaged and unfortunate were his true calling. Over time, Tariq Jat's situation improved. He saved some money and moved into a separate apartment in a suburb of the city, where he lived with another young man, with whom he quickly became friends. When Tariq Jat and Jasmine first met in 2018, the latter had already achieved considerable success in her profession. Colleagues praised her boundless dedication and optimism. The employer was thrilled with this sweet, kind-hearted girl. It's no surprise that Tariq J, who was loved for the same qualities, quickly became close to Jasmine. As they communicated at work and participated in group events together, they began to become friends. Soon, their business relationship developed into a romantic one. And by April 2020, they were already a couple in love. Tariq Jat never hid his true intentions, now openly declaring that he saw Jasmine as the one with whom he wanted to build a life and a strong family. However, over time, he developed a certain insecurity. Tariq J began to doubt Jasmine's actions and motives. Jealousy gripped him, and he began demanding detailed reports from her on where she was and with whom she communicated. The guy tried to control her every step, and if she planned to meet friends after work. He immediately became angry. Constant calls and unfair accusations became part of his behavior. One day, the young man demanded that Jasmine leave her friends and come home immediately. For the girl, such a life became unbearable. She couldn't stand it and shared her experiences with her mother. When her mother heard about the total control from her daughter's boyfriend, she naturally disapproved of the relationship. Tariq Jat didn't care about the interference of others. He was completely absorbed in his own world, wanting to be sure that his beloved would be with him all his life. In October 2020, Tariq J bought engagement rings and proposed to Jasmine. Despite their disagreements and ignoring obvious signs, the girl agreed to become his wife. The engagement didn't calm Tariq J but only increased his suspicions. Now, he used every free minute to appear at Jasmine's workplace unannounced, always with the goal of keeping an eye on her. After experiencing the euphoria triggered by the engagement, the girl began to reconsider the groom's behavior. Doubts overwhelmed her, and the thought of ending the relationship increasingly occupied Jasmine's mind. Eventually, she realized that the connection with Tariq J had negative effects on her mental and emotional health. After careful consideration on January 4, 2021, she told him that they should break up. In response, she heard angry threats and words from the man that he would take his own life if she left him. The next day, when Jasmine finished work, she noticed from the window that Tariq J was watching her. During a break, she went out to talk to him, and the guy once again begged her to stay, but she remained steadfast in her decision. Then, Tariq J once again threatened to harm himself, saying that she would be responsible for whatever happened to him. That same evening, Jasmine learned that Tariq J had taken a large number of sleeping pills. She never took his words seriously and didn't believe he was capable of it. Worried, the girl urgently contacted his roommate. A friend came and took Tariq J to the hospital, where he wrote a statement claiming he had tried to take his own life but took no responsibility for the decision. He blamed Jasmine's family for the breakup and suggested that her relatives had influenced her decision to leave him. The next morning, on January 6, 2021, a psychiatrist examined the man. The specialist found no signs of mental illness in the patient and concluded that the overdose was most likely due to the inability to cope with the breakup. Tariq J was discharged, but only a few hours later, Jasmine's ex-fiancé suddenly appeared at her place, insisting that she go with him to talk about something important. His real goal was to persuade the girl to resume the relationship. This attempt failed again as Jasmine refused. The guy was very angry and wanted her to pay for his suffering. In a desperate attempt to win back his beloved, he threatened to make their intimate videos public. Tariq J knew exactly that this would be unbearable for Jasmine's devout family. The trick didn't have the desired effect, and in the face of the girl's indifference, Tariq J sent the video to her mother. A few minutes later, Raj Pool, shocked, contacted her daughter, who was understandably also furious about the whole situation. The next day, the jealous man came to Jasmine's workplace. He stood next to his car, patiently waiting for her to finish her shift. Although the girl ignored him and simply walked away, he didn't give up. This time, Tariq J slowly followed her in his car, then suddenly gave up the chase, allowing her to reach home unhindered. However, the mentally exhausted Jasmine couldn't sleep properly that night. The pressure from Tariq J increased day by day, and each time he threatened to share the intimate videos with more people if Jasmine didn't come back to him immediately. January 28, 2021, became critical for the girl. Unable to bear it any longer, she officially reported her ex-fiancé for harassment to the police. Every detail of their relationship was recorded from beginning to end. Due to the severity of the matter, police officers launched an investigation and met with Tariq J on February 9 to clarify what had happened. The man received a warning for his unacceptable behavior. It is noteworthy that by this time, Tariq J had already developed a habit of writing text messages containing insults and bullying. Although most of these messages were never sent to Jasmine, they clearly showed the extent of his obsession. A few days later, the young man again tried to take his own life but was timely discovered by his roommate. When asked in the hospital why he did such a thing, Tariq J said he couldn't survive the breakup and begged not to be admitted to the hospital. Amazingly, they listened to him and released him under medical supervision. A few days later, the man began taking medication prescribed by doctors because he was diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and restlessness. However, at the same time, thoughts about harming Jasmine became more intrusive. With careful concentration, Tariq J began to develop his terrible plan. On March 4, 2021, he managed to get a map showing the locations of almost all surveillance cameras in Adelaide. The next day, he inserted his SIM card into another phone and left it at home to create an alibi. To avoid being filmed by cameras or noticed by acquaintances, the man also borrowed his neighbor's car, a blue Jeep. That same day, Tariq J bought gloves, cable ties, tape, and a shovel at a hardware store. The only thing he didn't account for was that every move he made was recorded by the store's surveillance cameras. He then drove to Jasmine's workplace, where he waited for her to come out. Around 10 p.m., the girl finished her work and walked out onto the deserted street, completely unaware of what awaited her. Suddenly, Tariq J. attacked her, grabbed her by the arms, and dragged her into the car. In the car, he taped Jasmine's mouth and eyes shut, tied her hands and feet, drove to a remote location, and carried his ex-fiancée into the trunk of the car. He then drove north toward the city of Hawker, nearly 400 kilometers from Adelaide. Between 11:30 p.m. and 3:30 a.m., 5 city surveillance cameras recorded the car he was driving several times along the entire route. When Tariq J. arrived at a location only he knew, he got out of the car and began digging a shallow grave by the roadside. He then opened the trunk and tried to stab Jasmine in the throat but couldn't cause significant damage. Unable to finish what he started, he let the girl sink into the grave and began to bury her alive. All this happened on the morning of March 6th. After burying the grave, Tariq J. got into the car, drove off, and discarded Jasmine's belongings along with the remaining cable ties, tape, and other items, including the gloves and balaclava. The place where he disposed of the evidence was known as Death Rock. When her family noticed that Jasmine had not returned home that same day, they began to worry. When the girl didn't show up for work, the employer also became concerned. Their anxiety increased when they found out that the employee's car was still parked in front of the building. Knowing nothing about Jasmine's whereabouts, her relatives contacted the authorities and reported her disappearance. For Detective Bray, who was in charge of the investigation, it was unlikely that the girl had gone somewhere alone or willingly with someone. He was sure she had been taken by force. Bray reviewed the security footage from Jasmine's workplace, believing they would provide a clue. One of the recordings from the previous night showed a particular person. The man loitered near the building and then drove to Hawker for most of the morning. To clearly identify the suspect, the authorities made a public appeal to anyone who might have information about a young man in his early 20s who had been in contact with Jasmine or had been near her in the days leading up to her disappearance. Unfortunately, no one responded. On March 7th, investigators came to Tariq J. to talk to him, as a harassment report had previously been filed with the police. Initially, the man denied any involvement in the girl's disappearance. However, he later told the investigator that he and Jasmine had argued, and she had allegedly tried to take her own life. According to Tariq J., he decided, after the bride lost consciousness, that she had died and buried her in a remote location. The next day, the prisoner himself led the police to this horrific grave. When the police dug up Jasmine's body, which was covered with a 30 centimeters layer of sand, they found that her hands were tied behind her back, her legs were tied with a cable, and her eyes and mouth were sealed with tape. The victim's throat was cut, but the wounds were obviously superficial. The body was sent for forensic examination, and a criminal case was immediately opened against Tariq J. The young man was charged with failing to report the girl's death. This charge deprived him of the right to leave his residence. During a more detailed interrogation, serious discrepancies in Tariq J.'s testimony emerged, leading to his arrest. The autopsy report confirmed that Jasmine was still alive at the time of her burial, and the cause of death was lack of air. These findings ultimately shed light on the horrific nature of the events. On March 8, 2021, Tariq J. was charged with murder and placed in a pre-trial detention cell. The man insisted on his innocence, but bail was denied. A few days later, A passerby found Jasmine's belongings near Death Rock. Prosecutors requested a delay of at least 9 months to prepare for the trial against the suspected perpetrator. His first appearance before the Supreme Court was scheduled for March 2022, but Tariq J. fell ill and tested positive for COVID. Instead of the suspect, his lawyer Martin Anders appeared at the hearing, declaring his client not guilty and actively defending him. The trial was postponed. It wasn't until February 6, 2023, that Tariq J. admitted his guilt before the Supreme Court of Adelaide. He openly stated that he had kidnapped Jasmine with the intent to take her life. The man's confession spared the grieving family the ordeal of a lengthy trial, during which very painful issues would have surfaced. At the same time, a sincere confession guaranteed the perpetrator a slightly milder sentence. 5 months later, on July 5, 2023, a judge at the Supreme Court of South Australia sentenced Tariq J. to life imprisonment. In a final attempt to reduce the sentence, the lawyer emphasized the significant impact the breakup had on his client, pointing to Tariq J.'s alleged psychological problems. However, the judge gave no chance to the defense, citing Tariq J.'s careful planning of all the details of the crime and the calmness with which he executed his horrific act. The sentencing hearing took place on August 1, 2023. After considering various factors such as age, psychological issues, and background, the judge concluded that the non-parole period should exceed 20 years. Tariq J. was sentenced to life imprisonment and would be eligible for parole after 22 years and 10 months, meaning he would be eligible for parole in 2044. In the event of his release, Tariq J. would have to leave the country. Before concluding the hearing, the judge explained to Tariq J. what his actions meant. He pointed out that as Tariq J. took Jasmine's life, he was aware of the monstrosity of his actions and therefore took steps to cover his tracks. He traveled far from the place where he kidnapped the girl to the place where he buried her alive. While driving, he had enough time to reconsider his plan and abandon it. But he decided to proceed. For this reason, the criminal must be behind bars to be held accountable for his heinous act. Raj Poole was satisfied with the verdict but said she would never be happy again because she wanted more than anything in the world to be close to her daughter. The inconsolable mother also added that she missed talking to Jasmine every day and continued to wish her a good night every evening, as she had done for almost 20 years. She noted that justice had prevailed and brought her relief. But it was hard to understand that a criminal could be released in just 22 years while she and her family would spend the rest of their lives without their sweet Jasmine. Relatives and friends of the deceased decided to create a unique place in their home to commemorate the girl, never to forget her pure soul and kind heart.